Today we're talking to Patti LaFleur, who was previously a care partner to her mom, Linda, who lives with dementia and type 1 diabetes.
My name is Patti LaFleur, and I cared for both of my parents, but more specifically, I cared for my mom, Linda, who had type 1 diabetes and mixed dementia in my home. She sadly passed 11 months ago today. She passed away, and then now I've stepped into a more kind of long distance caregiver role in caring for my aunt who has early stage dementia and Alzheimer's. Or dementia or Alzheimer's. We haven't figured out exactly. I'm sorry.
Yeah, obviously I'd love to talk about your relationship with your mom and what that experience was like. But, first, before we get into that, what's it been like now, long distance caregiving and some of the differences?
Yeah, I mean, she isn't too far from me, so that's helpful. But there is a definite different piece of caring for a loved one in your home versus caring for a loved one that is living in a facility. So with my mom, I did everything, right? I was the cook, I was the cleaner, I was the caregiver, I was the medicist, I did everything. And with my aunt, I am the support system for those people, right? All of her needs are being met by others, but I am still the one that is figuring out groceries and doctor's appointments and transportation and things like that. So in some ways it was easier with my mom because I was in charge of everything. So it's like, oh, who's going to do that? Patty is, like that. We know exactly who's doing that because it's just me. But with my aunt, it's like navigating this amongst other people who are trying to help me and me stepping in when I need to step in. So it's a very different role and easier in some ways and harder in others. You have to be really organized in a different way completely.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I guess, two questions. Like, how did you end up in this position caring for your aunt now? And then my other question is, like, how are you organizing and coordinating all of this between you and all of the other people that are involved?
Yeah. So, my aunt didn't have any children, and I am the most organized of all the cousins, and so it just kind of happened in my lap. She needed care when everything was happening with my parents, and so at that point, I was unable to provide care for her because I was caring for my mom, and my mom was declining, and then my mom passed, and then I was caring for myself. And I knew that this was a role that I should step into. So just about 6 months ago, I stepped into the role because I knew I could do the job very well because I do have a lot of experience in advocating for loved ones living with dementia and Alzheimer's and tools and connections and resources. And then navigating this it's just really making sure that I have a way to organize the information and a way to efficiently and effectively communicate with the people that are supporting me through this. Okay, you're taking her to this appointment. Okay, you're doing that. Oh, but I need to step in for this one. So really just navigating what I can do and what others can do to support me. And really in this caregiving journey I am on, it's really about setting boundaries. So for me, the boundaries have been kind of the most important part. With my mom, I didn't have a lot of boundaries because she was with me. And I couldn't have boundaries because it fell on me a lot. But with my aunt, I'm like, I'm going to be gone this weekend. So like you're calling someone else. Here's the numbers to call. Here's a calendar. I mean, it's all very clearly laid out on this is my turn to help. And then now it's somebody else's.
For sorry, I have so many logistical questions, but for people that are like in sort of a similar situation to you now, what are the actual systems you're using to manage that? Are you using like Google Calendars or just a group message or Slack? Like what systems do you use to coordinate this kind of care?
There's kind of two big things that I do is that we have just a group message that has all of us in it and then a specific message with the one person that helps me the most. So we're just in constant communication. She had an eye doctor appointment yesterday. I took her to the eye doctor. Then I'm filling that person in, and that person's texting me saying, okay, and I called for the dentist. So now we have a dentist appointment. So we're coordinating that. And then I use an app called Waywiser. And the Waywiser app is a calendar app. And multiple people have access to that calendar, so they know when things are coming up and they can get alerted. There's also a financial piece that they're adding into this app, which is why I decided to go with Waywiser as opposed to other applications, because I thought it would be nice. I am managing her finances, but I want other people to have access to them so that we can make sure we're all really aware what's going on, because that was kind of a concern before.
Sure. Yeah, that's a complicated piece when there's many family members or many people that are involved in the transparency of like what's going where, when, and why. That's
Exactly.
awesome that that's
Yeah.
working for you.
Yeah. So the financial piece can be really complicated. And I want to make sure, just for my own self, that like people know when I'm using her debit card, that I'm using her debit card for her, right? Like they're just clearly able to see that, so that there's never a conversation, especially at this point where she is in her dementia. She's really confused about money. That's a really challenge for her. And she's really, every transaction, when she gets her bank account, she has to call me and she has to talk through every transaction and what was purchased and who purchased it and when was it purchased. So this is just a tool. So when she calls other people, that they have the hope, I mean, they don't have the financial piece yet, but when they do, like, it'll be really helpful that they can be like, oh yeah, Patti said she bought you your Depends and toothpaste and all of these things, so she knows. Because right now she's at a point where she's trying to call Amazon and be like, what was the order? And they are like, we don't know, you did it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. I'm sure that's helpful to people
Yeah.
also that are trying to figure out, how to manage all these moving pieces.
Yeah, there's
Um,
so many moving pieces.
yeah, and it's awesome that you have, well, maybe awesome's not the right word, but it's beneficial that you have so much experience in caregiving to be on this care team now. I guess moving back to talk about your mom a little bit, because this was obviously an important relationship to you and a big chunk of your personal story. Can you tell us a bit more just about your caregiving experience with your mom? What was most challenging, what was most rewarding, and anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, for sure. So caring for my mom just felt like such a beautiful opportunity for me. I use the word opportunity to describe our care partnership, because my mom adopted me when I was a baby, and it felt really reciprocal to be able to care for her in her later stages. And so that to me was just such an opportunity and such a blessing. And we really lived. Like, my mom and I really lived and loved and laughed and found joy despite dementia. We did everything that we could to just really find joy and make sure that every day was an opportunity for us to continue to connect and build on our relationship. We obviously had a beautiful relationship pre-dementia, and so that was able to carry over into her dementia care. But I really intentionally continued to connect with her through activities and dancing and laughter and reading and creating this beautiful environment where she could really thrive in. For me, it's really important that we think about how people can still live despite a dementia diagnosis. There's this image in your head when you hear the words dementia and Alzheimer's, and I really hope that my mom and I's story challenges that stigma around dementia and Alzheimer's and shows people that you can still live a beautiful life.
Yeah, I mean, your videos certainly demonstrate that. Like, your mom is such a light in the videos you share, and definitely changes, I think, what people picture in their mind when they, picture a dementia patient.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
We were in Disneyland a year ago today. Like, that
oh yeah,
we were living, Like, I mean, it was hard and challenging, and I don't want to discredit that piece. I was exhausted a lot of the time, but by having a routine and a schedule and finding love and joy and laughter, it made it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I mean, having a routine and a schedule obviously made it easier, like you just said. What was that transition like? Like, right when you sort of started taking care of your mom, I'm sure there was a transition period where it was quite hard. How long, or maybe that's not the right question, but, how long did it take to find this routine and find it to be a joyful experience?
Totally. When she moved into with me, it like happened overnight. My dad had been caring for her, but then his health declined and he actually ended up in the hospital. And she was just going to come live with me until he was better. And he just never really got better. So she continued to live with me. And at first, it was really challenging. I mean, I was working full time, was caring for my mom. We immediately hired a caregiver because I was like, there's just no way I can do all of these things while I'm trying to figure out paperwork and systems. And there's a lot of those pieces. We have to make sure that I am her power of attorney. We have to make sure I know her medications. We have so many logistical things that I need to figure out in order to actually be her care partner. And so we hired a caregiver to help us. And then also, my dad was used to caring for her. So when he got out of the hospital, he had some care needs, but also he had some husband needs, right? He wanted to spend time with his wife, which is fair. So there was a transition piece where we were going over to my parents' house every day. And then the caregiver was meeting us there. And then they were spending some time there. And then the caregiver was bringing her here when I was done with work. So it took us a really long time to get into a group. Or not thankfully, I don't know. Thankfully, I was a teacher at the time. And so I had summers off. So there was like a 4-month period where we were just in survival mode. But then I had the summer off to really get us in a routine and prepared for the following school year. I tried to do both. I tried to teach full time and care for my mom full time with a caregiver that we had hired. And it was just too much. I felt like I was giving 70% to my teaching and 70% to my mom and 0% to Patti. And I couldn't do both roles. And thankfully, I have a husband who was working. And so we were able for me to quit my job that following year and make some changes in our lifestyle that allowed for me to care for my mom in our home without paying for a caregiver, right? Like we were using money to pay for a caregiver, but then that money just became something that we didn't have that expense.
Yeah, that's a hard decision to make. I mean, many caregivers go through the same decision making, and parents, like, we're paying for care, but would one of us rather be at home with our child or our care recipient?
Totally. And I wanted to be able to have some time for myself. And I felt like I wasn't with her a lot, right? Like I was like, oh, I'm working full time. I mean, thankfully I was working from home, but I was working full time. And then I didn't get to have any time for myself because I felt bad asking for care for the weekends or things like that. So I was able to shift to having care for the weekends every once in a while so that I could have some Patti time, because during that time I didn't have any time for myself.
Yeah, I mean, that's also I'm sure, like, the pandemic was a weird time and people started working from home, and now the separation, even if you're not a caregiver, just separating like work from life becomes strange. So to
Totally.
throw caregiving in the mix, it's just another layer of
Totally.
that. Can you talk a little bit about, it's been almost a year since your mom passed. What's life been like for you since?
It has been a huge adjustment. It was really hard for me it was hard to lose my mom, that was my best friend and I miss her every day. But it was also hard for me to give up the caregiver role in some ways. We had gotten into a routine. We had finally gotten to this place where we were in a routine. We had a schedule. We knew what we were doing. I mean, I was getting up a couple times a night and I was checking on her. So, even still now, I wake up in the middle of the night, often oh, I need to go check on her. Oh, nope, I don't need to go check on her. So it was a huge transition for me personally and, professionally, for lack of a better word. And now I've just really been trying to navigate how I continue to advocate and share our story and change, the dementia world, while still, figuring out what's next for me. I haven't really decided what's next for me. I wasn't ready to go back into the classroom in September. It just felt too quick for me. After she passed, teaching is a job where you have to give 110%, and I didn't have 110% to give. So I'm just kind of still in this place where I'm trying to navigate, what's next for Patti and what is going to bring my life the most value. I mean, I learned, if there's anything that I learned on this journey, is that life's short. And in connecting with other caregivers, I've learned that. But I've also learned from caregivers that are my age and are caring for their loved ones that are their spouses. They had a stroke or they had these other things happen, and life is so short. So, like, what can I do that's going to really allow me to live a life where I can thrive and I can support others around me?
Yeah, I mean, I know you've spent, like, that's part of why you're sharing your story, is to, destigmatize dementia and yeah, advocate for other caregivers and care recipients. I know you're sort of uncertain, but any thoughts about what comes next in that realm, or you think you'll go back to the classroom?
I don't know. Some days I'm like, I'm going back in the classroom. And then the next day I'm like, no, I'm going to figure out how I continue to do the work I'm doing. I mean, doing what I'm doing now, which has been like some contract work and some, small things like that. It has allowed me to still do the volunteering and the working with the Alzheimer's Association and doing these things that I wouldn't have the opportunity to if I'm working full time in the classroom. So I'm still trying to figure out what's next for me. And I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of exciting. World's an
Yeah.
oyster.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
I believe it. You started to talk about this a little bit about your husband, also working and allowing you the opportunity to care for your mom full time. I guess just to shift a little bit, that the point of this podcast is to, like, shed light a little bit on the impact that money and finances has on caregiving and life and relationships. Can you talk a little bit about, while you were caregiving, how that impacted thoughts of spending or saving, or even just thoughts about your future?
Yeah, it was really hard to go from a dual income household to a single income household. And it also really impacted our future planning, right? So before my mom moved in with me, we had just gotten married and we were like, we're going to start a family and we're going to do these things. And when my mom moved in with me, not only emotionally, I don't think I could have done, having a baby and caring for my mom, but financially, we couldn't have paid for two people's care. It was a lot. I was very fortunate that my parents did have some savings. So we were able to use some of their savings to pay for care, but it didn't pay for my care, right? Like, because I'm her daughter and they didn't qualify for programs that would allow for my care to be paid for. So yeah, it didn't pay for my care, but it did pay for other care to support her. And especially because my mom not only had mixed dementia, but she had type 1 diabetes. The cost of her care, because it was so specialized and needed to be skilled nursing, was extremely expensive. And actually, I couldn't use any home care agencies within our area because she needed insulin to be monitored. And because of insulin being classified the way it is, it needed a skilled nurse to deliver. So I couldn't even just use any general home care agency in my area. So I actually had to hire privately, which was just as expensive, if not more expensive. And when we looked at because there came a point where it was like, well, maybe I do need to think about what I could do for work. And if I was going to do things for work, we either had to pay for a caregiver or we looked into memory care. And because of her type 1 diabetes and needing skilled nursing, we were quoted that her memory care costs would be around $14,000 a month, and that her money would have gone very quickly. We wouldn't have been able to she wouldn't have been able to live there very long. So she would have just been right back in without any money that could provide care in the home. So it really, for her level of care, wasn't really even an option.
I smiled when you said that because that's wild. That's a crazy amount of monthly pay for that kind of care. Yeah.
And just really general care. I mean, it wasn't like,
Right.
I was not looking at the fanciest facility in the area. In fact, she couldn't live in most facilities. They had to have skilled nursing within the facility because of her type 1 diabetes. So I couldn't just look at any facility in the area, even if it was memory care. They didn't have 24/7 skilled nursing. She could not live there. So I looked, if she had gotten to a point where she had qualified for Medicaid, there was one facility in all of King County that Medicaid would pay for that she would be able to live in.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's so crazy. And also at the same time, we were paying for my dad. My dad was also in a facility at this time.
Right.
So, and they couldn't have been at the same facility because he wasn't in a place where he needed memory care. We wanted to so it was combined, his care needs were a lot less than hers. And he was in he only wanted the smallest room he could find in the whole place. But it would have been probably $20,000 a month between both of my parents.
Yeah.
They did not. Yeah. They would not. They wouldn't have made it a year. You know what I mean? Like they couldn't have paid for a year.
Yeah. That's so much. You mentioned that your parents had savings and that's how you were funding a lot of the care. I guess I'm curious, what else went into that? What was the insurance situation like? How were you or whomever funding your dad's facility? Like, what was the rest of the picture for paying for care?
Yeah. So for my dad, my parents had a savings and they were married. And so it was combined. And then they received Social Security, very small. And my mom worked very little amount of time because she raised me and my sister. So she worked a really small amount of time. So her Social Security was even smaller. So they got a very small Social Security that did not cover even a quarter of my dad's facility. But my dad, sadly, he moved into the facility in 2020 and passed in 21. So there was a very short amount of time that we were paying for his care, which is why he was able to stay there. And also, when we picked a place for him to move into, I made sure that it was a place that allowed for a Medicaid spend down. So we were in a spend down program that would have allowed him to stay in that facility after he had reached 2 years, but he didn't make it the 2 years. So then he paid the full price for 11 months, I believe. It also was a new facility. So he got the first month free, so I was looking for all the deals. I'm very crafty in finding deals. And insurance besides Medicare was the only insurance that they had, which paid for prescriptions and going to the doctor and things like that, but they did not qualify for Medicaid anytime that they just had I talk about this a lot because they had enough money, but they didn't have a lot of money and they didn't have too little. They were this perfect middle section where they had just enough money to barely survive.
Yeah.
It was almost harder. There were things I was I was looking for day programs for my mom, or I was looking for, getting meals delivered for my mom, or these kind of things. And they had just enough money that they didn't qualify for any programs, but too much money just enough money, but not enough money that they could have survived. I mean, thankfully, from a financial aspect, they lived in this space for a very short period of time, because then it would have fallen probably on me and my husband to make sure. Because I mean, it was my mom. I wasn't going to allow her to not receive a high level of care. But I don't know. Yeah, I just don't know what that would have looked like.
Yeah. Did you and your husband like play that what if game at all? Like,
Yeah, I
what
mean,
was that like?
yeah, the what if game looked like we were going to figure out how we could have a caregiver come back in the home. And my husband, thankfully, is off every Friday. Works 4/10. So it was like, how can we find someone who can do 4 days a week, and I can work full time and my husband can work full time, so we can just basically pay for a caregiver and all my mom's supplies to keep her home as long as possible.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because, well, it's crazy too, because for my parents, like, something that was really important to my dad, because his mom had Alzheimer's, was that he would have enough money to pay for him and his wife's care, for as long as they lived, because to him that was so important. So he saved and invested and did everything right. But if they had lived as long as they potentially should have, my mom passed pretty early, I think, then that it wouldn't have been enough, which is so crazy, because he worked his whole life to have that and lived a very minimal life, so that he could, a minimal but happy life, so that they didn't go without, but like, so that they could have a quality of life, and it wouldn't have fallen on me and my husband, and it did. I mean, if my mom would have moved into memory care instead of moving in with me when she moved in, I mean, they would have ran out of money very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, what forward thinking of your dad, though. I think about that all the time. My mom passed a couple years ago, and it took care of my dad for a while. And now I'm looking at my own care for the future and what I'm saving and how I'm planning for that now, which I think is a unique, not unique, but you have to have gone through it to be thinking in that way, because many of the people who I assume are about the same age as you and I are not thinking that way, because they've not experienced.
Oh yeah, I'm telling my friends, like, long-term care insurance. Like, get your parents involved in it now. I mean, a lot of my friends' parents are in their, late 50s, early 60s. I'm like, they can start paying into it. At least it's gonna be something, My parents, I mean, my dad would have 1000% paid into long-term care insurance, but it wasn't something that they talked about 30 years ago, when he was doing his end of life planning,
Sure. And I'm sure they couldn't have well, maybe someone predicted, but the cost of living has gone up substantially since your dad was planning for this.
Exactly. I know. I mean, I remember when I had shared with him, because when my mom moved in with me, he's like, I just don't want you to have to give up your life for this, all of those things. And I was like, well, then let's look at facilities just to get an idea. And I shared with him, and he was like, yeah, no, that's not happening. Like, I mean, we would not have been able, I also think about, how would we have paid for her? Yeah, that facility covers her food and where she sleeps and her care, but it wouldn't cover her depends or her clothes or all of these other things that she would have needed to survive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a wild world out there. You mentioned that you're pretty scrappy, and you were like, got a deal on the first month. In terms of looking for caregivers and memory facilities and just all of this research that you were doing, what was that like for you? Were you, calling places? Were you Googling? I'm thinking about people that are, at the beginning of their journey now, trying to figure out what are my options. How did you start researching?
The first thing that I did when I was like, oh, it's happening. I mean, I was helping my dad in their home for about 6 or so months before my mom moved in with me. So I was trying to get care to their home originally. That was kind of before I knew she was moving in. So the first phone call I made was to my local Department of Aging. So I just actually, I think I called 211 or whatever the information line is. And they were like, call the Department of Aging. So I called my King County Department of Aging, which I would recommend to anyone, like Google local Department of Aging in whatever county you live in, because they know the resources in your county. And immediately I got like a list of lawyers. They were like, you need to make sure you have power of attorney documents. They were like, basically walked me through all the things that I needed. And then they're like, here's some local resources for caregivers. There are caregiver grants. So I started that whole process. Well, after calling a bunch of care agencies, I found out that the level of care that my mom needed, I had to call a skilled nursing type situation. So it became really complicated. So then I went to good old Facebook and I wrote on my Facebook profile, has anyone ever used a caregiver that they've just hired themselves? And who have you used? And send me all the recommendations. And actually, one of my friends, she was a caregiver at the time and she worked for an agency, but she had been a med assist at a facility. So she had training with diabetes. She was like, actually, my client that I was currently caring for just passed away. I'd love to work with your mom. So I was able to hire her through, we did like the whole tax, whatever you had to do. So we were able to, I don't remember it anymore now, but we were able to hire her privately without having to go through an agency, which was amazing. So word of mouth, I think, like, ask the people around you, because there are a lot of people because I also got recommendations for other people. Oh, my grandma, they use this person, try calling there. So word of mouth. I've heard of other people like asking at church, and sometimes like churches have some resources or people that they can connect you with. So that was one way. The Department of Aging was just like my first stop. And then also just for the memory care facilities for my dad, we used a place for mom. We just used that like senior care advisor search services. And then with my mom, I honestly just cold called because I knew how, like, I wanted her to be within the area. And so I really wanted to make sure it was somewhere close. And I just called and wanted to go and do tours and just get a feel for myself without someone telling me what I thought. With my dad, it was different because his needs were so different and he could advocate for himself. My mom was unable to advocate. So I needed her to find a place, because we did eventually find a memory care facility where she did some respite stays so that I could have some time to myself.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the, finding your local office of aging. I think that's a great like first step for people.
Yeah. And AARP on their website too. Now you can look and they will have local resources by state. So they will have like, you can look for just Washington State. I mean, it does take a little bit more digging. Same with, I called the Alzheimer's Association. That was also a resource. I called them it's like 211 local Department of Aging, Alzheimer's Association. And they were able to support me too, specifically around like support groups and like caring for the caregiver piece, but awesome no matter what. And then I found this beautiful online community. It was like, it's kind of all those things fell. And then I found this online community. And then that's really where I've learned a lot.
Yeah. I mean, the online community, this community of caregivers on social is a really special place to be, because you don't know what it's like until you don't know what it's like. And so finding a group of people that understand you is very special.
Yeah, they're my friends. They're my friends. I met them a lot of them in real life. Like, these are my people.
Totally. You are obviously very organized. You're caring for your aunt now. You've talked about how you're organizing that. You've talked about how you found care and resources for your parents. I'd love to talk, if you are comfortable sharing, about like systems that were working for you by way of managing money and, social security, income, and like all these pieces. How are you managing it? What was working well, and what could have been better in your systems for managing money?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, at first it was just like very, very unorganized. I had like a folder that I just put everything in. But as I have like revised my systems, honestly, the best way for me to organize things is just an Excel spreadsheet. I just am continually updating the Excel spreadsheet in things that I've paid and things that I like that are coming and I need to pay. So for me, it's very much like an Excel spreadsheet because it's so easy to share. It's also where I organize all the things. So I have for every person, I had like a password file, and it was just all their passwords. And so that way everything was in the same place and everyone just had their, as far as like folders, I had a filing cabinet that was basically just caregiving and it was like my dad's folders, my mom's folders, Patty's stuff. And so that's how I organized, was really just very generic, but really making sure that as part of my routine and my schedule is that every Monday is like update your Excel spreadsheet day. So I'd made sure that I carved a day a week where I just took everything that I knew I had done that week and put it in, because it was too hard for me to do it all the time because, things were constantly changing and my mom might need me or my dad would have needed me or these things. So I just scheduled a time, like mom's watching Kelly Clarkson, Patty's updating her Excel spreadsheet,
Yeah. I love that. Can you tell us about your Excel spreadsheet? Like what was actually in there?
Yeah.
How did you organize it? How did you build it?
Yeah, I kind of had just like different tabs. It was like the first tab was, well, for my aunt, I guess is easier to talk about because now with my parents, it's been a while. So for my aunt, it's like expenses. So like all the things that we use her debit card for to purchase. So I put it in there, what the price was and what I bought. So that way when she asks me, I can be like, oh, toothpaste, but I don't write everything down. But it's easier for me than keeping all these receipts and having them somewhere. It's all just in there because I can't always find every receipt at every moment. And then the next one is like bills. So what are the things like the medical bills as they're coming in and have they been paid and when they've been paid and who paid them? Because she's still really wanting to pay for things. So she's writing some checks. So when are they paid? And then like on hers, it's like I have her passwords in that same file. So that way I can have like her social security number easily accessed, because constantly when I'm calling to talk to someone, they're like, we need the last four of her social. And then as far as like appointments and stuff, that's in a separate calendar. But mostly those are the big things that I have organized for her. And then I just have a folder that has, her will, her power of attorney, her healthcare directive, a copy of her pulse form. Like I can easily just grab it. Typically, I actually have like a purse that's just like like it's a big bag purse that I use when I take her places, and I just have it pretty much pre-loaded with those things. I don't even keep them in the file because when we go to the doctor's office, if it's a doctor I haven't been to, they're going to ask me for a power of attorney. They're going to ask for a copy of the pulse. So I just have it all there. So I just, if something happens, if her facility calls and is like, she's going to the hospital, I can just go. And that's what I had with my mom. My mom had her backpack and it was like, okay, when something happens, I don't have time to go look for her power of attorney. I don't have time to look for her medication list. I just can grab this and go. Oh, that's another thing that's on the Excel spreadsheet is a copy of her medication list. So I just have everything that I could need in an Excel spreadsheet, because then I can access it from my computer. I can access it from my phone. Like it's just so much easier if something happens.
I love that like grab bag tip. I think that's good to, instead of keeping it in a filing cabinet, it's like if it's going with you all the time, keep it in a backpack that goes with you.
Exactly. Especially the medication list. I feel like that was probably asked for more than anything else, when there's an emergency, right? Like, and I'd always had like for my mom, she was a diabetic, right? So it always had like extra snacks or some sort of drink that could bring her up really quick. We needed to just always be prepared, because not only was there the piece around the dementia that was challenging, there was her diabetes that was important to be taken care of. I also had those cards in them, like it says like, I'm caring for a loved one with dementia. So that way I can have those easily accessed, so that I could give them to people. So that way they were more patient. With my mom, people were pretty patient because she, for the last year, was in a wheelchair and always carried her robotic dog. So I think they kind of were like, oh, we got to be patient with this lady. But with my aunt, she presents as very much doing great, but people need to be more patient with her because it's going to take her longer to process. So I carry those cards with me so that I can pass them out.
Yeah, I love that. I can also like sense the school teacher in you
Oh,
with some
yeah,
of these tricks.
for sure. I am definitely a kindergarten teacher.
Yeah, but everything you just said, I think is, super helpful to people that are experiencing this same thing.
Yeah.
With your Excel spreadsheet, is there any like it sounds like you use Excel. Are there any limitations or things you like feel like are missing or you can't do with this sort of like, self-made system?
I would love something that could also include some more like space for notes. Like what I found is that, yeah, that's really helpful for those pieces. But when I was caring for my mom, something that was really challenging was I wanted to be able to take notes, like when we were at the doctor's office or when we were at with physical therapist or anywhere we were. And I tried a lot of times to take notes on my computer and put them in a Word document and have them be easily accessible, but the system never worked. So then I, just defaulted to putting it on a piece of paper. But, a notebook is helpful and I'm very good about going back in a notebook, but it isn't as easily accessible. And so we would be at the doctor and they'd be like, well, when did you notice it? I'd have to go look in my notebook, find the page. I mean, it was just not easily accessible to have notes and a spreadsheet and some sort of way to track everything in the same location.
Yeah, I feel like having a calendar and the notes and the spreadsheet all linked makes it easier. So when doctor says what happened at your last visit, on March 25th, this happened, right?
And like for us, we were doing a lot of tracking with my mom around her blood sugar. So they'll be like, what have you noticed about her blood sugars? And it's like, well, that's on a whole different spreadsheet I have to find, So it was just complicated. But it is right. But I would love a system that put it all together. I mean, especially when people are living with dementia or Alzheimer's and they have some pretty high medical needs that you also need to be tracking.
Totally. We, again, Givers is, we're young at this point, but we are on a mission to make just like the financial piece of caregiving easier and less stressful. And we're doing that by building tools to make this easier. And so right now on Givers, you can, sort of basic, but we're starting on like a forecasting tool just around budgeting and like how much money you need to be saving or, where your money is going, et cetera. But on this roadmap is more tools like what you've just described to be able to link all of these things and share it amongst, you and the rest of the care team. So
I feel that is the piece that was missing with my mom's Excel and with the Excel spreadsheet with my parents was that, then I'd have to go into Excel. And I know there's probably a way I could have shared it with my sister, but I don't think she had an Outlook. So then I think I might have had to move it to Google. I mean, it was just one of those things. And I am such a like Microsoft person and that's what I'm comfortable with that like people were like, well, try Google Drive. But then I'm not as familiar with Google Drive. And so then that became complicated for me and it's not what my emails through. So it just became something that it was another thing to manage that I wasn't ready to manage.
Totally. Yeah. Our hope is to make this easier for caregivers.
You guys will.
I would love to ask, what do you know now that you wish you knew at the beginning of your caregiving experience?
How important support is. I think that for me, I thought, especially in the beginning, that I could do it all myself. And although with my parents, I had to do a lot of it myself, I had a lot of great support along the way from just people that I could check in with, people that I could vent with, people that got what I was going through. And I wish that I would have thought about support more, even from just like an emotional aspect for myself. I have amazing friends. My husband is great, but I just really tried to do everything myself. And I wish that I would have thought more about like who are the people that could be supporting me in this and what could they be supporting me with? With my aunt, it's very different because I've gone through this and I really am setting boundaries, but I had no boundaries in caring for my parents. And I had actually a really hard time giving up boundaries, right? I was like, well, no, I got it. I got it. Like, it's easier for me to just do it. But there are things that I could have, when people ask me, like, how can I help you? I could have said, yeah, you can go to the grocery store for me. Like, thank you. I will pay for it. Just you need to go. Like I could have come up with things that would have been helpful. Yeah, you can find someone to clean my house, like those things. I did end up finding a house cleaner that I liked. So that was really helpful. I mean, that was huge, but I wish I would have had support from the beginning because maybe I wouldn't have gotten so burnt out with both. Maybe I would have been able to continue teaching and we could have thought about starting a family, who knows what that would have looked like if I wouldn't have felt so burnt out so quickly.
I think it can be hard to you look back and you say, I wish I had asked for support earlier, but early on, it's hard to ask for, to know how to ask, not even what you're asking for, but this level of pride or guilt, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for me, it's I want to do it. I guess any words of wisdom to, people that are going through it right now on how to move past that.
I think that for me, I just wish I would have accepted. I wish I would have just put my pride to the side and just looked around and really just know that it's going to be so much easier if people do help. And I do think that if you do find support emotionally, even if you don't have support in person or someone that's going to help you with your groceries or these things, if you have emotional support, so find a support group, find one person that gets it, then you can do it. The emotional piece is just as important really as the physical piece. The financial piece is different because there is such a barrier and the cost and work and all of those pieces. But emotionally, if you can find someone that you can talk to on your hardest day, it's huge.
Yeah, I mean, and so much of it is interconnected, right? The physical piece and the financial piece and the emotional piece, financial stress, it's stress and all of it sort of layers on top of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, it was really when I made the decision, I mean, I didn't really make the decision, but when I finally was I'm a caregiver and admitted to it, it was I really had to be can I emotionally, physically, and financially care for her? I had to have all three of those pieces in place. I wouldn't have been able to be a successful caregiver if I couldn't emotionally do it, or if I couldn't financially do it, or if I couldn't physically. I mean, we had to lift her by the end. My sister and I talk about this a lot. She was if I was caring for mom, I couldn't have done it. It just wouldn't have happened. I lived in a second-story apartment, and also I just don't think I could have lifted her every day.
Yeah, I like those three check marks to make sure that you're taking care of you and taking care of your care recipient.
Yeah, for sure. Because it was a partnership. I had to be able to show up too. You know what I mean? Totally. If I wasn't able to show up, she couldn't be successful in her care receiving.
Totally. I think you barely just answered this a little bit, but we like to ask everyone, what's your top tip for other caregivers?
I mean, find support is always my top tip, and don't be afraid to ask for help. But also, I would say that try to find moments of joy, find those moments, and those are the moments that are going to carry you through this journey. It's really hard. It's really heartbreaking. It's really challenging to watch someone that you love lose pieces of themselves, but there are moments of joy, and find those moments and live in those moments as much as possible. You don't always have to be doing something with your loved ones. Sometimes just sitting next to them and holding their hand can be just as beautiful as anything you're doing together.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, we're talking about recording things and a place to take notes. I think something like that is a good thing to be recording and remembering. I think Chris of Life with Grams does a great job at, like documenting her gratitude. And I think similar to what you just shared, documenting moments of joy is also very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Chris does a beautiful job of documenting the love that her and her Graham share, even in just like the smallest moments.
Totally. If people want to follow along with you now and your ongoing journey as a caregiver and just your life, where can they find you online?
I am Miss Patty Cake, MISSPATTICAKE on Instagram, and I am Care Partner Patty on TikTok.
Love it. We will be sure to tag you, on both as we publish this. And thank you so much for like sharing so much about your journey and really digging into like the nitty gritty of it. I think it's really helpful to other caregivers.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was lovely, and I'm so excited for what you guys are doing.